Chapter 7. Moonshine Brothers. Church Lester made whiskey from the time he was a young teenager until he died. His brother Charlie also made whiskey from the time he was a teenager until 1961, when he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for murder. It was said that Church and Charlie always had a pot boiling. Many believed they made the best whiskey brewed on Walden's Ridge. Church and Charlie were master distillers who paid close attention to detail and did not rush the process. They worked hard to obtain a high-quality whiskey that commanded a premium price. The Lester family were neighbors of the Alice Clark family, who lived about halfway up the mountain on Clark Gap Road. This road ran from the Robnett home in the valley to Frank Lester home on Walden Ridge. Alice's husband, Thomas Crutchfield Clark, and his brother Jonah made legal apple brandy for several years around the turn of the century. After Thomas's death in 1904, Alice continued making legal apple brandy until Tennessee outlawed the manufacture of evil spirits in 1909. Elizabeth Robnett said Alice was a good woman who would never do anything illegal. Therefore, she stopped making brandy during Prohibition. Alice Clark was reported to have been the first person to teach Church how to make spirits. Church helped her make apple brandy for a few years prior to 1910, when he was only a youngster. After he was discharged from the Army on July 29, 1919, Church became engaged to marry one of Alice Clark's daughters. A wedding date was set. The Clark family had prepared a big wedding dinner, which was on the table waiting for the groom's arrival. Church didn't show for the dinner, and the couple never married. Addie Robnett was reported as saying Church would have married Mamie Clark if she would have had him. A Swiss colony in Grundy County, about 35 miles southwest of Bledsoe County, made legal whiskey. Several people from Bledsoe County visited there to learn how to make good whiskey in the very early 1900s, prior to Prohibition. Church very well may have gone there to hone his whiskey-making skills prior to 1910. Mountain land on Walden's Ridge during the Moonshine heyday from 1910 to 1950 was very inexpensive. Thousands of acres of this rough timberland was owned by wealthy absentee owners who rarely checked their large tracts of land. The moonshiner seldom made whiskey on his own land. For the most part, he used land belonging to these absentee owners. It's estimated between 50 and 100 stills were operating at all times on Walden's Ridge in Bledsoe County throughout the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s. For example, D. Wooden, who lived on Walden's Ridge, reported he knew of 14 stills operating on a small Wasp Creek in the Hendon area in the 1930s. Avoiding the revenuers was a challenge to all the moonshiners. The families and friends of the moonshiners often used mirrors and flashlights to warn the men working at a still that a suspicious car or person was coming their way. These mirrors could flash light off the sun to the still operator from a mile or more away. Sometimes the person with the mirror was a wife in their home, or it could have been a lookout on a high cliff or a high ground overlooking the still. Flashlights were used mostly at night. The moonshiners would form a loose coalition and hire one lookout to notify several operators. Gunfire was often used to alert everyone. Glenn Lester said the warning signal used by his father Charlie, his family, and other operators in the area was that anytime someone spotted a revenuer, they fired 5 rifle shots. In some other areas, they tied a stick of dynamite to a bush or a tree limb, and the lookout set it off if a revenuer was spotted. Also, very small threads were sometimes stretched across the outer perimeter of a still, about a foot off the ground, when the operator left the site. If revenuers or anyone else went to the still, they'd break that thread without feeling or knowing it. When the operator returned and the outer perimeter thread was broken, he knew someone had been there, and he would be walking into a trap set by the law. The moonshiner also had to contend with some local men whose favorite pastime was stealing a gallon or two of whiskey for their own use. Walden's Ridge was the responsibility of the Chattanooga U.S. Revenue Office. Automobiles from Chattanooga had a number 4 license plate. After phones were installed in the mid 1990s,